Alexis Morgan is Global Water Stewardship Lead in the freshwater practice of WWF, the world's largest independent conservation organisation. Alexis, OOSKAnews reports on corporate water responsibility and stewardship, related news stories for our readership regularly. We certainly detect an increase in buzz around the subject and awareness of the private sector globally of the concept of water stewardship and water-related risk. Do you detect the same phenomenon?
Yeah, absolutely, and you can see it in the media coverage, ranging from day zero issues in Cape Town all the way through to issues in California with crop production and so forth. So the issues of droughts and floods are in the news almost daily, and that all affects businesses at the end of the day. So absolutely, businesses are starting to pay a lot more attention to this. So yes.
And part of that, parallel themes have been awareness of the importance of water beyond typical water-centric constituencies, the water-food nexus, the water-energy nexus, and the economic incentives for water conservation and economic water-related risk, real economic, non-touchy-feely reasons to take water stewardship seriously.
Yeah, indeed, water's an interesting challenge because it is highly valuable, and then at the same time often has no price, and where it is priced, it's not always priced correctly. So the economics of it are quite interesting, and what we often find is that the economic case for water often does come through the nexus. So it's the energy savings and some of the value there that is tied in. With that said, water is certainly something that is a social value creator, and indeed we can look at river systems and track some of this and look at how GDP grows and is increased along a river system. It's no surprise that cities and the economic engines of the world are based along these rivers.
Is it still true, or am I being a little cynical to say that sometimes the corporations that appear to embrace water sustainability programs are largely blue washing and are CSR programs? Is that cynical? Does that phenomenon exist?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the phenomenon exists. I think that said, there are a lot of companies that are very serious about this. They've been told to deal with this by shareholders, and they're putting it on the table. This is no longer a touchy-feely issue. It's real. And I certainly can think of numerous examples of issues where we've been working with partners, and this is no longer an issue that is handled within corporate, communications or public relations. This is an issue that's dealt with by sourcing, by operations, and by finance. And when you're dealing with those people, you know that this is no longer some sort of high-level exercise. So, certainly there are many examples where this is having real bottom-line financial impacts, and that's backed with a lot of the data that's being reported by CDP and others, that there are billions and billions of dollars being affected. And when you start talking those numbers, shareholders start to listen. So it absolutely is getting very real for many companies out there.
More real for some sectors than others, maybe. Who do you detect? Who are the shining beacons? Which sectors are doing it right, and which ones really should catch up to this game?
Yeah, well, certainly our experience is that there have been some sectors that have been first to act on this, and it's maybe not surprising who they are. It's the ones that are largely tied into agricultural supply chains. Farmers have been dealing with water issues since the dawn of civilization. So the food and beverage sector, the retail sector that ties to that, and certainly the apparel and textile sector all have these touch points, not only in the raw agricultural commodity side of it, but also then in the processing side. They're highly water-dependent industries. And so they've been, out in front on many of these, and certainly many of our corporate partners are in that space, players like H&M, Coca-Cola, and so forth.
And who are the bad guys?
The bad guys, I would like to call them not so much bad guys as, good guys that haven't realized that they need to take action yet. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning, frankly, and is out to do evil things. Nobody wants to go home thinking that they're doing bad things to the planet and destroying freshwater resources. People do it mostly out of ignorance at the outset. And I think a lot of what we have learned as we've worked with a lot of these big companies, like H&M is a good example. You work in the field with their suppliers, and it's an educational exercise, and suddenly people begin to get it, and they get it not only that there's an opportunity to save money, but there's an opportunity to also benefit local health and the ability to do create rivers that are swimmable, fishable, drinkable, and people are happy about that. But nobody wants to live in a polluted environment or a water scarce environment. So by engaging suppliers in that way and showing them that there are opportunities to both make money and create other forms of value, you quickly all of a sudden turn those bad guys into good guys.
And one methodology or program that WWF has pioneered is specifically, and you and your team have been talking about it this week here at World Water Week in Stockholm, is a corporate water risk assessment tool called the Water Risk Filter. It's another part of the water stewardship jigsaw. It's a really interesting and cool tool to use. Perhaps you could give our listeners and readers an overview of the thinking behind this particular program.
Absolutely, and thanks. Yeah, we are quite proud of it. It's a tool that's been around with us for the past 7 or so years now, and it's seen a lot of changes, and it's about to see a lot more changes coming up. But essentially, the Water Risk Filter is a tool that we built out of originally sort of the financial lens in all of this. We were working with DEG, the German Development Bank, and they were looking for a way to really screen their portfolio to understand who was exposed to water risk and who wasn't. So we sat down with them and we began to build something that acted as a screening tool to really look at what are the basin risks that a given facility is facing and what are the operational risks that that facility is facing. And as time has gone on, we've added a lot more functionality, and we're on the verge of doing that again. So yeah, I mean, it's essentially a tool that you can go in, put in a few key pieces of information, and it provides you with a quick assessment on what are the water risks that you ought to be paying attention to in a given place on the planet and across a portfolio of operations.
We're looking forward to the new changes, and one observation is that there is more than one water risk assessment or reporting tool, perhaps complementary. But perhaps there's a bit of a confusing landscape for corporations assessing their exposure to water risk. I mean, I'm thinking about organizations like the World Resources Institute and the Carbon Disclosure Project and other water footprint assessment tools. As you look to expand usage of Water Risk Filter, do you agree that there's some confusion in the market about who does what and what does what?
Yeah, there certainly is some confusion. The unfortunate part, I suppose, that I would say is there need not be that confusion, because most of these tools do quite different things and come at it from a very different perspective. And it's also part of the reason we opted to do a lot of the redevelopments that we did in the tool that will be coming live this fall. The version 5.0 that we're going to be going live with begins to expand functionality into areas where there isn't an ability to do certain things in other tools. So as an example, in the two other kind of platforms that you mentioned, just to use as an example, the World Resources Institute's Aqueduct Atlas has a number of things that it does incredibly well. We looked at it and we decided, there's some really good data sets in here, and we encourage any company to use, frankly, whether it's our tool or that tool, to do a basin risk assessment. Both tools are great. They both do really robust basin risk assessments. Where they begin to differ, and you might look at one or look at the other, Whereas Aqueduct dives really quite deep into some of the flood risk analysis stuff, and it's great for those sorts of things, and I would send people towards that. Our tool does some things that Aqueduct also doesn't do. So we look into regulatory and reputational risk in much greater depth. We look at operational risk, where theirs only focuses on basin risk. And increasingly, we're now going into these new areas around translating risk into value, as well as translating risk to response. So the new tool will actually say, here's your risk assessment, and on top of that, here's what we suggest you might want to do about that. Because we were finding that companies were sort of saying, great, that's our risk assessment, now what? What do we do?
Sure.
I'm a bit lost. And so for people that are quite sophisticated, they're going to know what they want to do on that, and that's great. But increasingly, as we try to engage not just the leaders, but these other players, whether it's SMEs, the bad guys, as you maybe referred to them, but those that are maybe just a little newer to the space, we're giving them a bit of a template of actions as a starting point in all of that. So that's one of those functionalities that doesn't exist in that space. The other kind of platform that you mentioned around CDP actually is, again, a great example. So not only are we incorporating the WRI data into the new version, but we're also actually working in close collaboration with CDP. We've long been a supporter of their disclosure data and so forth. And in fact, they ask companies as part of that disclosure to do a risk assessment, and in turn they then track some of the responses. We're starting to take advantage of all that data that they're gathering on response to inform our tool now. So there's a bit of a virtuous loop actually between those two systems, and they do serve different parts in this universe.
And the new version will be live in later this year.
Yeah, so we're rolling it out likely in a sort of a series of phases over the course of the fall. We're hoping to have the first part live at the end of October, and then another part at the end of November, and the final part at the end of December. So likely a sort of a phased rollout is what we're targeting at this point, barring problems, but that's what we're shooting for.
Well, OOSKAnews will let our readers and listeners know as that rollout happens. We've also been reporting this week on another initiative that WWF has been presenting in Stockholm, a new update of your Water Stewardship Brief paper, which, can I describe it, presents WWF's vision of water stewardship, what it means, for the benefit of companies, but also governments and investors, the finance sector. This update of a previous edition describes present and coming years as a critical period and calls for urgent action on water. Those are strong words.
Yeah, they are, and rightfully so. It's not even action now, it's action yesterday. And the case examples, whether we're talking about what's going on in, Karachi and the fact that there's no water there, or issues in East Africa, South Africa, the droughts in Sao Paulo, flood issues all throughout Europe and other places. I mean, this is an issue that is clear and present already. The issue, however, goes beyond that. It's that we're not scaling up our impact here. We're not really coming to the table with the money and the resources that we need to actually affect change. And WWF by itself obviously will never have the level of impact that it needs to. We work in partnership fundamentally because it's the only way that we're going to get scale. But I think what we're increasingly realizing is that to really have a scale to the level that we need, we're going to not only have to really engage the finance sector to mobilize capital in all of this to a whole different level, but really reframe the narrative from this notion of, hey, avoid the risks, solve these problems, to one much more based in sort of an optimistic vision and around value creation, and really see this as an opportunity to drive change and at the same time create value, both economic value, financial value, but also value in terms of social value and ecosystem value.
And you mentioned scale, and scale kind of operates two ways. There's the taking it up a scale to the finance director level, but on an operations level, taking it way down the scale to small supply companies, farmers and small manufacturers that are more difficult to manage and to educate, even for the most well-meaning of corporates in food and beverage or textile sectors. That's a very difficult challenge. How do you address it?
So certainly from a WWF perspective, one of the things that we're quite proud of is how we operate as an entity, and we can work at those global scales in boardrooms because we can engage there, but equally we can get down into the field, and we've got teams all over the world who are in the field, hand-holding, engaging, having dialogues, and frankly building capacity, because you need to have local capacity at the end of the day. And so, there are great examples of our teams in places like Pakistan where they've started to work with small and medium enterprises tied to supply chains, but working directly and doing training and capacity building to get to understand how this, again, is beneficial for those SMEs financially, why this makes bottom line sense, but at the same time, all of the other benefits and the value that's created out of that. And so the work in Pakistan started out with a few dozen SMEs, and we scaled it to hundreds of SMEs. And then we've taken it and scaled it from 1 city to 4 cities. So we're scaling all of that gradually, and now we're touching base with hundreds, if not thousands, of different SMEs, and really building the capacity, and then that can disseminate from there.
And in conclusion, thanks for your time, Alex. I mean, are you generally optimistic or pessimistic about our corporations, but also our planet's people and governments recognizing the importance of water as a crucial planetary resource and making some difficult decisions about how we have to change behaviors? Do things look brighter?
There's no question that there are serious challenges and very difficult trade-offs that are going to need to come in all of this as we go forward. There are difficult decisions in front of us, but I don't think anybody who works in this space and anybody who's committed to sort of seeing everything from the Sustainable Development Goals on through delivered is going to be a pessimist. You can't be a pessimist in this space. And I'm frankly, looking at it, I'm not. We've had such huge change over the last 10 years. And yes, there's a time crunch, and yes, we're not getting to where we need to be. But the number of allies that we can call upon now is unlike it was when even my career started. And as we go and look forward and really try to enhance this narrative around valuing, rivers, valuing how we approach water stewardship, there's a whole new potential to just change this to a different scale of impact. And if we can show scale and impact, I think it really creates a narrative of optimism and hope that I think people really are looking for in this space.
Thank you very much for your time, Alexis Morgan.
You're welcome. My pleasure.